The summer of 1936 was dry in western Nevada in a way the old men who remembered the drought of the early 1900s admitted they had never seen. The rain did not come in the spring, and it had not come the winter before, and a shallow desert lake in a valley northeast of Walker Lake, one of those lakes that shrinks at the edges every year and fills again by March, did not fill at all that year. It pulled back all summer, uncovering ring after ring of cracked bottom, and by August the water was a puddle in the middle of a mile of gray, dried mud broken into plates you could walk across like a shattered pavement. On August 19th, a cattleman named Will Day rode out onto the bed of that lake, looking for calves that had drifted after the retreating waterline toward what grass was left. He went farther out than anyone had gone in his lifetime because farther out had never been dry before. Half a mile from the old shore his horse stopped. Day thought it had smelled quicksand and got down to lead it, and that was when he saw what it had refused to walk into. A stone stood up out of the cracked mud. Not a boulder. There were no boulders on that bed because a lake bed is silt and clay, not stone. It was a vertical slab standing plumb with straight edges as high as his chest. Day cleared the crust of dried mud off it with his palm and understood he was standing in front of an opening. 2 upright jambs of dressed stone and a third stone laid flat across the top of them. A doorway. No wall around it, no building, no anything, just a doorway standing alone. In the middle of a dried lake. He led the horse on, and 20 paces further he found a second one. Then a third. They stood in a row, all the same height, all with a lintel across the top, and all of them, Day did not notice this at first, but only when he had walked the length of the row and turned around, were facing the same way. The open side of every doorway looked to the southeast, out toward nothing but flatbed and a far ridge. He counted 11 before the row ran back under what water was left. And the doorways led nowhere. Behind each one was the same gray mud that lay in front of it. But they were doors. And Will Day, who had spent his life setting posts and hanging gates, knew the difference between stone that fell and stone that was placed. Somebody had placed these. And he told his brother a thing the brother never forgot. You build a door for something to go through. And if there is no wall, then it was not a man who was meant to walk in. Subscribe now if this matters to you. The algorithm does not push this, and unless you subscribe, the next one will not find you. Now, here is what you have to know about that ground, because everything about these doorways is impossible for the same reason. That valley floor is a playa, the flat bottom of a basin with no outlet, and the geology of it is boring in the way that makes this so hard to explain. Water runs down off the ranges after the rare storm, spreads out across the flat, has nowhere to drain, and evaporates. What it leaves behind is silt and clay, laid down flat and fine over thousands of years, layer on layer, until the bed is dozens of feet of soft sediment. There is no stone in it. There is no gravel, no cobble, no ledge, nothing harder than dried mud all the way down until you reach the buried rock of the basin far below. To find dressed building stone, you have to leave the flat entirely and go up into the ranges that wall the valley. And the nearest of those is miles off. Somebody quarried stone in the mountains, dressed it into jambs and lintels, hauled it down onto the softest ground in the region, and stood it up in a lake. And that is the smaller problem. The larger one is the mud itself. The doorways were not lying on the bed, fallen and scattered the way stone scatters when a structure collapses. They were standing upright, plumb, in a straight row, in sediment so soft it will not hold a fence post through one wet winter without heaving it. Anything a man stands up in a playa sinks, leans, and falls, and the desert has had a very long time to take these down. It has not taken them down. Something set them deep enough and on a footing solid enough that thousands of years of a lake filling and drying on top of them left them standing in line. And the line pointed somewhere. What happened out on that bed over the next week survives in 3 accounts. And none of the 3 knew what the others would say. Will Day told the whole of it to a county historian in 1959 when he was old and had buried most of the people who could have argued with him. Martha Coyle, the wife of a rancher on the next spread, wrote to her mother in Reno on August 24, 1936, 5 days after Day found the row, and the letter sat in a trunk for over 50 years. And Sam Ott, who was 16 that summer and rode out with the men, gave a recorded interview to a small desert museum in 1994. All 3 described the same thing, and the details are exact. The jambs were dressed stone, roughly a foot wide and half a foot thick, standing about 4 foot clear of the mud, and no one knew how much more of them was buried. The lintels were single stones laid across the top, notched into the jambs so they would not slide. Coyle wrote that the top stone was let into the side stones, like a carpenter's joint cut in stone. There was no mortar anywhere. The stone was pale and fine-grained, and it was not the rock of the near ranges, which is dark and volcanic. Men who had prospected those hills said so on the spot, and the doorways were identical, not similar, identical. Same width, same height, same thickness, the same notched joint at the top repeated 11 times down a dead straight line. That is not how a man builds with quarried stone, dressing each block to the boulder he happened to drag down. That is how something is built to a single specification, from stone cut to a standard by whoever cut it. And Sam Ott, in 1994, was the one who added the detail the other two left out. He said his father knelt at the foot of one door and dug the mud away from the base of a jam with his hands, wanting to see how deep it went. And that a foot down, the jam was still going. And it was set into a floor. They dug at the base of the third doorway for the better part of a day. For men with shovels and a bucket, because Sam Ott's father would not leave it alone. What they uncovered under the mud is the reason this did not stay a ranch story. The jams did not stand in the sediment. They stood on a floor, flat dressed stone. The same pale material, fitted in slabs and running out from the base of the door in every direction they cared to dig. Between the two jams set into that floor was a threshold, a single flat stone spanning the opening, level with the paving, worn in a shallow smooth dish across its middle. The way the stone sill of an old church is worn by feet. Except the sill was worn on one side only. The dish did not run evenly through the doorway. It was cupped on the southeast face, the open face the way the road looked, and it ran out to nothing on the other side, as if everything that had ever crossed that threshold had crossed it going one way, coming in from the southeast. And nothing had ever gone back out. A door in a wall is worn on both faces, because people go in and they come out. This one was worn like a drain, all the traffic running one direction. And then the man digging found the edge of the floor. It did not simply stop, fell away, a clean-cut edge dressed square. And below it the shovel found nothing but the same soft mud that filled the whole lake. The floor was a lid. It was laid over the top of something. The paving was the roof of it, and the doorways stood on the roof like markers over a thing the lake had been sitting on the whole time. Ott's father put his shovel through the gap at the edge of the floor and felt it swing free in open space underneath. He pulled it back out. He would not put his arm in. By the third day, there were more than 40 people out on that bed. And with that many ranchers standing around a straight line of stone, somebody was always going to take a bearing. A surveyor named Harlan Price, who ran section lines and water claims across 3 counties and happened to be working a dispute nearby, rode out to see the thing everyone in the valley was talking about. He brought a transit and a compass, and he did the work nobody else could do. The row was straight, not roughly straight, but true over the whole run of 11 doors. Straighter than Price could have laid it himself. Every doorway stood plumb, and every doorway faced the same bearing to within a degree southeast. The open sides all looking to the same patch of sky above the same notch in the far ridge. Price sighted along the row out through the doorways to where they all pointed. And what they pointed at was the low saddle in the eastern range where the sun would come up. But not where it comes up now. Price, who had spent his life with the angles of the land, worked out that the doors were not aimed at the sunrise of any ordinary day. They were aimed at the point on the horizon where the sun rises at one turning of the year, and the alignment was off from the true mark by a small wrong amount, the amount the sky itself has drifted over thousands of years. Aim a row of doors at a sunrise and come back long enough later and the sun will have moved off your aim by exactly that much. The doorways were pointed correctly. They were just pointed at a sunrise that had stopped happening on that spot a very long time ago. And every threshold was worn on that side. Whatever the doors were built to let in, it came from the direction of a sunrise that no longer rises there. Word of the doorways reached the outside, and a thing like that draws official attention. So, before the end of August, a man came out from a state office in Carson City, Everett Shaw, tied to the survey and water people, the men who by 1936 owned every question about where Nevada's water went and why. He spent 2 days out on the bed. He measured the doors and the floor and the worn threshold. He looked at Price's bearings and did not disagree with them. He knelt a long time at the worn threshold, running his thumb along the dished side. And Sam Art remembered that he asked one question and only one. Not what the doors were, but which way the water would run if it came back onto that bed. He had a man take photographs, and he took a piece of a broken lintel away with him in a canvas bag. And then Everett Shaw did the thing that turned a wonder into a warning. And within the week, the state opened the gates on an irrigation storage reservoir in the range above the valley. A reservoir built after 1905 as part of the water projects that reshaped every basin in the state and sent its held water down the natural drainage into the dry lake. In a summer when every ranch in the valley was watching its stock die for want of water, the state let a reservoir run down into a playa that grew nothing. The water reached the bed in a matter of days. Nobody in the valley had asked for it, and nobody downstream saw a drop of use from it. It spread out across the flat and stood, and the doorways went under. By the middle of September, the row was beneath 4 feet of water on the softest ground in the county, and the mud that the drought had cleared was mud again. Nobody stood up and ordered the doorways drowned. They did not have to. The state controlled the water, and all it had to do was let some of it go. Here is what should be filed somewhere and is not. Everett Shaw's report on the site has never been found in any state record. Shaw did not disappear and was not threatened, and getting that wrong is how this story gets told badly. What happened is quieter. In the spring of 1937, he was moved off field work to a desk in a different division on the stated grounds of a reorganization, and the reorganization moved exactly one man. He finished his career indoors and never surveyed in the field again. The piece of lintel he carried off in a canvas bag has never been catalogued, tested, cited, or described in any record anyone has produced. Harlan Price's field book for that August, the one with the bearings in it, is not among his papers, which his family kept complete for every other month he ever worked. The photographs Shaw's man took have never surfaced in any archive. What survives is what the families kept. 2 prints, one of a single doorway with a man standing beside it for scale, the lintel and jambs unmistakable. One closer of the worn threshold, the dished stone catching a low sun. Both are in private hands. A geologist and an archaeologist were shown them together in 2010 on the condition that neither would publish. The geologist said the stone in the images matches nothing on the valley floor and nothing in the near ranges. The archaeologist looked at the row and at the bearing and at the one-sided where on the sill and said the closest thing in his professional vocabulary was a processional threshold, a door built not to divide 2 rooms, but to mark a crossing a line to a rising point in the sky. Then he stopped himself and said he was describing a form, not making a claim, and that he was not going to be the one to say who crossed it. He was asked what would settle it. He said a coring rig and a week. Then he said the site was under a lake and that lakes in Nevada are not as permanent as people think. The same drought that emptied Wildays Lake was drying basins all across the Great Basin at once. And Day's row of doorways was not the only thing the falling water uncovered that decade. In 1934, 2 years earlier, another closed lake to the north dropped to a record low, and a rancher moving stock across the exposed flat reported a line of standing stones running out from the old shore into the bed, evenly spaced, all of a height. He told a stock inspector, who wrote 3 lines about it in a logbook, and the next wet winter refilled the basin. And no one went back to a place that is underwater again to this day. The stones in the northern basin faced a bearing, too, the inspector's 3 lines said, all leaning their open sides one way, toward the low eastern gap in the hills. It is the same story as Day's, told 2 years and 1 valley apart. A straight row of set stones aimed across a lake bed at a notch in the eastern range, uncovered by drought and taken back by water before anyone with a camera and a reason arrived. And it fits a pattern that is bigger than either lake. All across this dry country, the same thing keeps happening in the same shape. Something built and buried is uncovered by an accident, a drought, a slide, a wind that strips a field, and it stands exposed for a handful of days, and then the same force that hit it or the people who control that force put it back under before it can be examined. Water hides the doorways in Nevada the way lava hides the corridor in Oregon, and dust hides the grid in Nebraska. The lid is different in each place. What is under the lid keeps turning out to be the same, dressed stone set to a plan older than the thing that covers it, aligned to something that is no longer where it was. Strip it down to the facts that cannot be argued with, and there are three. The doorways stood on a stone floor, and the floor was the roof of a hollow the lake had been sitting on. The row was aimed to within a degree over 11 doors at a point on the eastern horizon, and every threshold was worn on one face only, the face the row looked toward. Those three facts do not leave much room. A door built into a wall is worn on both sides because people pass through it both ways. These were worn like a river, everything moving one direction, in through the southeast face, and the southeast face is aimed at a sunrise that the drift of the sky says stopped rising on that notch thousands of years ago. Which means the doors were aimed true when they were built, and they were built when that sunrise still landed in that saddle, before there was anyone in the accepted account of this continent to quarry a lintel and cut a joint in stone and stand 11 of them in a line on the floor of a valley that later filled with water and became a lake. Nobody built a door for a wall out there. There is no wall. The wall is not the point. The point is the crossing and the direction of it, and the thing that only ever came in and never went back out. Will Day walked the row once in August of 1936 and turned around and understood before he had the words for it that the doors were not for people. He rode away, and before the month was out, the state let a reservoir down onto the bed, and the row went under 4 feet of water, and Day ran cattle on that shore for another 20 years, and never rode out to it again. He told the historian in 1959 that the thing he could not get past was not the doors, and it was not the floor under them. It was the thresholds worn on one side. Whatever they were for came in out of that sunrise and crossed, and did not come back, and the doors are still standing under the water in a straight line, plumb, facing the place where the sun used to rise. Nevada is drying again. Every lake in the state is lower than it was, and the row is down there in the mud, 11 doors and a worn stone floor over a hollow nobody has opened, waiting for the water to pull back one more time, and this time the sunrise it faces will still be in the wrong place, and there will be more than one camera on the shore.